Dr. Susan Yelich-Biniecki, and on behalf of the College of Education at Kansas State University and the Social Justice Education Graduate Certificate Development Team, I would like to warmly welcome you to one of a series of programs focusing on social justice education. Dr. Marzanna Pogorzelska is with us today to present on social justice education, a global perspective. And we are looking forward to hearing her views and experiences on social justice education and project-based learning within the Polish context. Our gathering today gives us an important opportunity to think about social justice education through perhaps a different lens and reflect on our own subjectivities as educators and researchers as we engage with social justice education with diverse communities and international colleagues, including those within our own organizations. I would like to recognize Associate Dean Linda Thurston and members of the Social Justice Education Graduate Certificate Team Development. Raise your hands out there for those of you who have worked tirelessly throughout the year to make the Social Justice Education Graduate Certificate a reality. The first program course to be launched next Tuesday. We have two members of the first cohort here as well. Raise your hand. And I would also like to recognize Dr. David Thompson, who is not able to be with us here today, Chair of the Department of Educational Leadership, for his support of Dr. Pogorzelska's visit to Manhattan, Kansas. It is my pleasure to introduce our presenter today, Dr. Marzanna Pogorzelska. She has been an extraordinary teacher for almost 2 decades and was a 2013 Lowell Milken Center Fellow. She has received major teaching awards, including one for promoting understanding and tolerance. Her research focuses on multicultural education, human rights education, critical pedagogy, and gender. Her work in social studies and Holocaust education is recognized in many different areas. Project-based learning is her approach to teaching. Her students have developed projects that have been recognized in many areas of Europe. Her teaching of tolerance and equality has set standards for many educators. Marzanna earned a master's degree and PhD from Opole University in Poland. Her degrees are in pedagogical sciences. She has been a leader in Polish education and has demonstrated a creativity and highly academic student curriculum. She has taught secondary students for 18 years in her hometown of Kędzierzyn-Koźle. She has written numerous articles. Marzanna has also received Teacher and Citizen Laureate Awards from the countries of Poland, France, Germany, and Spain. In December 2012, Marzanna was honored with the Golden Cross of Merit Award from the President of Poland, which is given to teachers who have outstanding educational achievements in shaping the civil virtues of the young generation. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Marzanna Pogorzelska.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for this introduction. I really feel honored and privileged to be here. Thank you for organizing and supporting this visit and being with you and the possibility to share my experiences. I hope you'll find it interesting. Thank you very much I know that a lot of people were involved in making it possible for me to be here. Thank you very, very much. And now, today I'm going to talk about social justice education and project-based learning in this education, because in my work, both as a teacher in the past and now as a lecturer at university, I try to connect these two areas, so to teach social justice through project-based learning. And I will talk first, before I speak about my experiences, I talk a bit about background, Polish and other Eastern European countries. When we think about social justice education and these countries, the situation was different, I guess, from the Western Europe, from the United States. And I think this background may be useful to understand how this social justice education works in Poland now. So starting with Poland and other Eastern European countries after 1945. So the war is over and the reality in Poland changes completely. We, the Polish, and the citizens of other Eastern European countries find themselves in quite a different reality. First of all, we are under the influence, the sphere of influence of Soviet Union, which means a lot, which changes our situation. And the system that we are going to have to introduce is socialism or communism, although nobody really explained to us what it meant. When I was a child and then teenager, we were told that we live in socialism and we head for communism. So that the system was based on philosophical foundation of Marxism and Leninism, and again, it was quite vague in public understanding what it means, because we were told it was based on working class rule, for example. So the working class was to be now at power, which was the case, but which also meant that, you know, if somebody is at power, somebody else has to lose power. So some big layers of society, some groups of society were excluded from deciding about what's going on in the country, like intelligence, like the pre-war middle class people, like the owners of any private property. These were the classes, the groups that were excluded and were looked at with suspicion, I would say, in this system. It also, as far as economy is concerned, it meant nationalization. So again, because in this system, the private property was looked at with this suspicion, everything was to be national, and there was centrally steered economy. Everything was decided by one main ruling party. There were more parties, but they were called satellites. There was one ruling party that decided about all the issues, including economy. Of course, as it was the new system, and people were not used to it, and you know, the war was long, of course, it was 6 years, but not long enough for people to forget how the reality looked before the war. So the propaganda was turned on to convince people to the new system, with the censorship as one of the main tools of this propaganda. And since the censorship office was created just after the war, every word, every song, every poem that was publicly spoken in Poland was controlled. And I think also the social life was marked by unification. We were supposed to be the same in the way of thinking, in the way we think, we speak, we work. And also not only at individual level, but at, I would say, cultural, national level, we were constantly told that we, the Polish people, are, we consist of pure Polishness, which excludes different minorities, which after the war was to some point true, because before the war in Poland we had 30%, our society was made up of 30% of different ethnic or national minorities. After the war, because of different reasons, this number decreased to 2 or 3%. It was also connected with border changes and migrations, which, again, border change does not mean only moving line on the map. It means the people's pilgrimages from places to places. It means uprooting from their traditional environments where they used to live. I remember my father was born in the east of Poland, so the territory which belonged to Poland for many, many years. But after the war, it was decided, or at the end of the war, it was decided that it would be Soviet Union. So they found it out, and they had 2 days to pack all of their things. He was a boy then. He and his family got on the train, and they just went west. And they stopped somewhere in mid Poland, and they were waiting for 2 weeks on the train because the conference in Potsdam was taking place at this time, and they were waiting for the final decisions of the conference and decisions about borders. And when the decision came, it turned out that these and these cities and villages would be Polish, and they went there. So they found themselves in Opole, the place where they lived, and they were given a flat, which was just a month ago, 1 month before, left by German family who went west. So, of course, it was the experience for him, but for thousands, millions of Polish people. They were, as I said, uprooted, but they couldn't find easily their place in the new state, in the new reality. They didn't feel at home there. They didn't feel at home in their own state as well. They could not identify easily with it. And what you see in the background is social justice, which it is on purpose in the background, because in official narration, all these changes that are here were to be based on social justice. So this was the purpose of these changes, but it was really hard to believe that it is like this, because people saw that not many things or almost nothing happens according to social justice, but the formal philosophy, formal declarations were that we are doing it for social justice. And in education, when we now focus on education in Poland, of course, all these things I told you about were mirrored in education because, first of all, in Polish context, the education was very much influenced by post-war destruction. We lost the material base of education. I mean, schools, libraries, cultural houses. And we lost 1/3 of our teachers, but also doctors, priests, lawyers. So everything that creates the tissue, the cultural tissue of the nation. After the war, we had 20% of illiterate people, and we also, the ethnic uniformity influenced education because it was to enforce this image of Poland as a unified country without any minorities, without any diversity. And education was just one more propaganda tool. And if you look at documents from these periods, especially 40s and 50s, you see that education was called ideological offensive or battle for the youth or educational front. It's very military vocabulary, as you see, but that's how it was. Of course, everything in education was centrally decided. Schools were not independent, teachers were not independent, and the school lives, types of schools, curricular textbooks were decided somewhere in Warsaw, of course, with the party approval, and everything was to be collective, so which does not mean cooperation. I mean, people were supposed to cooperate, but it was not a choice. It was something imposed. Of course, it was collectiveness was connected with controlling. If people are in the group, it's easier to control them. And school controlled different areas of life, not only the school life. And also in education, you could see how the Catholic Church was marginalized. So very soon after the war, the religion lessons and religious symbols were withdrawn from schools. A lot of magazines, organizations, societies were closed, and the new ones with the party approval were created. And what was very typical, the general education was neglected, because it's logical. If it was to be the working class country, the working class must be educated. So vocational education was the most important, the most appreciated type of education in this time. And actually the main goal of this education was creating so-called a new man, who, of course, it was not explained like this, but in fact, if you looked at the hidden layer of all these documents, of all these school regulations that I analyzed and that they are described in literature, this new man was to be, yes, subordinate, passive, average, helpless in a way. The person who is helpless is dependent on the state, is not individual, which was a kind of a goal. And it also was a man escaping from freedom and responsibility to a great extent. So that was the assumption, but of course, reactions to the model were not unified. They were people who conformed to it. They were people who pretended to conform. And I think a lot of Polish people showed pretended conformity, which means, yes, at work, at school, I agree with Marx, with the party, with all this ideology. But at home, I behave and I speak totally different things. And I go to church, sometimes to christen my baby, I go to another city, not to be seen in my environment, but I do. So, and of course, the rebellion was one of the reactions. That's why we were able, after all, to change the system. It was not that everybody conformed. But we have to admit that a lot of people were affected by the decades of such a system. And I know it's very quick, but it's very important to mention what happened after almost 5 decades, 50 years of this system. In 1989, the post-communist countries changed everything again, and this transition or transformation process had a few features, but we, since then, we've been in alliance with the Western countries, and we access European Union, and we have real democracy and freedom. It's not only the appearance, but the reality. But at the same time, what people did not expect after these decades, that the state limited the safety, because before 1989, a lot of things were pretended, but at least people felt somehow safe. For example, we officially did not have unemployment or homelessness or poverty. And after 1989, with market economy, all these phenomena appeared. And people were left helpless because they were taught to be helpless and passive, that thousands of people couldn't cope and still cannot cope with this change. Another thing that we inherited, apart from this helplessness from the old system, is low social capital. That it is called our social disease in Poland. It means, the low social capital means that we cannot cooperate very well with each other. We don't trust each other very much, really. And that's how the social capital is measured. But no wonder that it's like this, because after the decades of living in the state where it's better not to trust each other really, it's better not to cooperate, and if their cooperation is controlled, people really show very little interest in such cooperation. And also, with these changes, what came to Poland was diversity and pluralism. We saw in Poland that we are not so homogeneous, that we have different religious minorities, national, ethnic minorities. It was kind of discovery. The revival of Jewish communities started in 1990s, for example, and we found out that we still have Jewish people, and we used to have Jewish culture that many Polish people did not really know. But also, what happened was a kind of ideological gap or empty space, because before 1989, the world was quite clear. There was clear division. Here we have West, here we have East. There is Iron Curtain which divides us. In Poland, we also had such a clear division. It's us and them. Them, authorities, party, and us, the people who maybe pretend to conform, but in reality don't agree. And now it disappeared. So, you know, life hates these empty spaces, these gaps. So new divisions appeared, and as we also experienced some crisis in economy, you know, the scapegoats appeared, different minorities started to be these them. Like, I think Roma people, for example, in Poland are a good example for this new them, new others, I would say, that appeared. What also came with the transition was regaining the position of the Catholic Church in Poland, which, as I told you before, was very marginalized, and its influence was limited, and the church was persecuted in different ways. After 1989, it regained its position. And again, that's the background, and it was mirrored in education. First of all, after 1989, with all these changes, we had great hopes for profound changes in education. We thought, yes, now we would be educating people in different way, in open way, not just showing one way of thinking, but be more diverse, more democratic. More democratic. We really changed the system. We performed some reforms. So new types of schools appeared, not only public, but belonging to societies, to private people, etc. We agreed to have different textbooks, curricula, etc. But these reforms were never supported by enough finances. So it was never really finished, and it's still on. And what we experience, what influences the education, is still chaos, as we couldn't work out one view of developing education, and it always depends on the current Minister of Education, and they represent totally different views, from liberal, radical to conservative. So, and education changes. Education hates the, every year changes. It cannot be done like this. So, as a teacher, we felt it very much. What didn't really change so much as we expected were our teachers' attitudes. They were, for years, teachers were taught to teach students would be passive, subordinate, submissive. And very often they still follow this model. And I think the category of appearance in education is still something important. Category of appearance was present in Polish life before 1989. It means that a lot of things in our social reality was pretended, I would say. We had a government, and we had so-called people's democracy without real democracy. We had economy without market. So it was just pretended. A lot of things in education is pretended. So the authorities impose or suggest some changes. Teachers very often pretend, and they know that it's just time. It's a question of time to wait until the new idea. So they don't really change as much as they should for change in education. So very often in Poland we can meet with the opinion that education is the area between free market and traditional values, which can mean that with this free market neoliberal education, we concentrate on exams, on competitiveness, and with this background, social education seems like just a needless luxury, something that we don't really need because our students must be competitive, they must do their best in the exams, and other things are not really important. And what also can be seen in education, and I come back here, is something that we very often express now, that in all these changes after 1989, maybe one thing that we forgot or didn't remember well is equality. Because people were so seduced by free market, by freedom. Wow, I have my passport at home. I can leave whenever I want. I can speak whatever I want. We are free. That's wonderful. Our shops are full of products again. That's wonderful. But in all this, we may have forgotten about equality, and we also experience it in education. I would say equality, so social justice, is not something that it's really emphasized, that we are really focused on in education. And as for traditional values, it can be interpreted that we rejected the communist legacy with all the symbolic sphere of it. The communist legacy is also vocabulary that was used and abused there, like social justice, like working class even, the term is not neutral, like equality or class equality, like class struggle. These all for people means communist legacy. We have to forget it. Let's not talk about it because it's we associate it with all times we want to forget it. So that was detrimental for social justice in practice. If you kill this symbolic sphere, it will also not appear in practice. And we started to promote national and patriarchal values, which means that again, we focused on teaching about Poland and Polishness, but again, this Polishness, this definition, was a bit limited, restricted. Again, I would say, not in the same way, but it was very often connected with being not so open to others, with xenophobia sometimes, I would say. So in these, teaching diversity and human rights very often is seen, and I experience it as controversial, as something, again, not only not necessary, but maybe a bit dangerous. And it also very often involves authoritarian approach in education. One of other prominent educators said that education in our country is oriented towards teaching about and for democracy, but not in democracy. So for democracy and about democracy, one should be taught in autocracy. A lot of teachers think so. So they teach, they speak about democracy, but at the same time, they breach the students' rights, for example. They cannot see the connection. They cannot see they do not associate the way they turn to their students without respect, for example, sometimes, with the democracy, human rights, and things like that. If at any point you would like to ask, comment, please just signal it.
I actually have a question from the slide right before this one. Sorry, the one next one. This one? I think so. No, that one. You talk about the strong position of the Catholic Church and how it was relegated or pushed out during the period of time. Before? But then, before, and then it was then allowed back in. What is the predominant religion other than Catholicism in Poland before and now today?
It was Catholicism. Over 90% of people identified themselves with this denomination. And we have some, I think, others. The 5% of people do not identify with any religion. And we have about 3-4% who identify with Protestant religion and with, I think, I don't know how it's called, the Eastern type, the Orthodox, but another Eastern type of Christian religion. And yes, we have some thousands of Jewish people, but you know, it's too little to talk about the percentage. So over 90% before and now, these are the Catholics.
I'm just curious, I'm really curious about this. You say the teachers are teaching the students, but they don't believe in democracy because they're not living in democracy?
No. I would say they do believe. They can teach about democracy. I think they understand what democracy is. And we live in democracy. We have democratic system in the political terms. You can vote and choose whoever you want, etc. But they very often do not understand that their attitudes towards students can show whether you believe in democracy or not. And very often when I speak with students and with future teachers, my students, and I speak about human rights and democratic rules in the classroom, they said, no, let's not talk about it. We are fed up with it. The students only have rights, not duties. They forget about the rights. And I do understand them because the democracy and human rights sort of fell on them, on teachers. After 1989, they were told, now you will be teaching human rights, democracy. And, you know, after the years in teaching in the old system, it was not clear to them what actually we should do, how to do it. They were not taught, and they are still not, I think, very much. They are not taught how to show respect in your everyday practice, how to rule school in a really democratic way. That's it. Did I answer your question?
I see strong parallels with Asian democracies in that respect, because
really?
we have the same issue that you have democracy in theory, that all men are created equal, and one person, one vote, and all of that. But then those democratic values clash with those traditional values, which are rooted in patriarchy, rooted in family structures, rooted in all of that. And so the idea that the young must respect and obey the old, that women must respect and obey the men, all those clash with democratic values, and you have a society which still is strongly influenced by those traditional values, which are in many ways pre-modern, and you're trying to establish a modern democracy. It's the same thing in Asia.
Yeah.
In Asian democracy as well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's that's how you say, and it's very difficult to change because then you have to dig in somebody's values, which is very risky and yes, can hurt.
After the invasion of the Germans into Poland and the, I'll say, extermination of the Jewish folks, how did the country start dealing with that after 45?
With the, you mean with the elimination of Jewish?
Right.
The communist government was very anti-Semitic. So it was not like this that we said in 1945 the war is over, the millions of, out of 3 million of Jewish population, the rescuers, there were 300,000 rescuers. So it was not like that we said, oh, we are so sorry. Now we have to help these people, etc. No, this government was, the communist government was anti-Semitic as well. And after the war, we also had some pogroms that made the Jewish people who survived leave the country. We had anti-Semitic events in 1968 that were steered by the communist government. It made the rest of these people leave the country. So when you ask me how they dealt it, the Jewish people were still, to great extent, perceived as the threat, as something alien to our Polishness. So, and it lasted for decades, and it started to change in 1989. The revival of Jewish people, the admitting that what happened during the war and after the war. So it really started in 1990s. Yeah. You know, I remember when I was a child, we were taken to Auschwitz concentration camp. I remember I was then when I was 10, so it was in the 70s, and we were told that the Polish people were exterminated in this concentration camp, but were not told that they were Jewish. It was a kind of discovery for me and for many Polish people. Of course, these Jewish people were Polish, but it was not the reason why they were sent to gas chambers. Not because they were Polish, not always, but first of all, their Jewishness decided. So that's the example that shows how they dealt. They wanted to make the authorities wanted our Jewish past to disappear, to, you know, make it vanish from our heads, first of all. Shall I continue? Yeah. And now a few words about project-based learning. As the tool of social justice education, project-based learning, we did not know it really before 1989. It came with transformation, with transition. Also because we imported a lot of ideas from the West, from the USA, because we needed new ideas to refresh our education. And in 1999, in our big educational reform, we even wrote it down that realizing project is obligation. And again, we can discuss if something that is obligation. Is it good, really? But that's how it is. And why we decided to focus in education on project-based learning? Because the educational authorities, a lot of teachers, saw it can be the remedy to decreasing social capital, the low social capital, because if you do projects, people cooperate, that's the core of the project. And also the European institutions demanded us to introduce some key competences in education, and these were also social and civic, like cooperation, etc. And when I was doing research on students and schools, how they deal with project-based learning, I found out a lot of challenges, obstacles, because it's again, the projects fell on teachers again as obligation. And very often they are realized with limited students' engagement. Very rarely the projects refer to the local problems, which should be the key issue. The research process is something that is very often not understood what it is, because students very often think that doing project is just finding some pictures on the internet, putting it on the PowerPoint, and that's it. Not going to people, not interviewing, not visiting not finding the resources. And they don't know how to cooperate really, how to negotiate, how to take decisions. They focus on delivering the final products. The process is not important, but the product again. And the schools that do well in projects are the ones which cooperate with non-profit organizations that offers some themes for the projects and then support and supervise realizing the projects. And for my experiences with social justice education that was realized through the projects, first of all, when I worked in high school, I was running school group of Amnesty International, which was voluntary group of students. We met after lessons and we realized different projects very much connected with local community, with diversity, equality, human rights. And now at university, I run a similar scientific circle of intercultural education with my students. Again, it's voluntary for students. And I cooperate with non-profit organizations that deal with different topics, and these topics are connected with human rights, democracy, etc. I also do research on these issues and try to find as many teachers as possible with the results of this research to show them how this education can be realized, and I run workshops and training sessions for students, teachers, focused on stereotypes, prejudices, discrimination, and exhibitions, events in the public space. And now I have chosen some examples of my activities with students, and it's just some excerpts, some pieces of things we do to show you how we perform it. So one of the projects that I do regularly is so-called Living Library Project, where we organize it for the whole community area in one place. It can be library, it can be the culture house, and we invite people representing different minorities exposed to discrimination. So people belong to national, ethnic, religious, sexual minorities, people with disabled people or older people, unemployed or homeless. And they they are the books, and the people who come are the readers. You know that, maybe, yes. You know the idea. In Poland, it was quite new, and when I organized it for the first time, some years ago, I wanted to organize it in the public library in my city, and public library is governed by the city council, and the vice president of the city forbade me to do it because I wanted to invite the people from representing different minority, and he opposed to inviting a gay person because he said that if I invite a gay person, it is the promoting homosexuality. And when it was described in the newspaper, the next day I had phone calls from some institutions in the city that offered me the place, and I organized it, and hundreds of people appeared, and to support. And then in other places in my region, this living library started to be organized. And it's not satisfaction for me, but this vice president lost his position. But he's not unemployed. He doesn't live in poverty. And it's not because of this, but it was one of the reasons why people said, no, you will not censor us. We were censored in the past. No censorship anymore.
Is the country of Poland's social justice grounded in legislation?
Yes, it is. I mean, the name can be different. It is, but if you ask about the legislation connected with minorities, of course, in our constitution, it's written that Poland is the country that provides equality for everybody, regardless of their views, nationality, religion, etc. But it's very, very general, as the constitution is. And in fact, only in, I don't know if you have the equivalent in the USA, but only in one document in the so-called labor code. So the set of documents for people working. All the minorities, including sexual minorities, are protected. In other documents, it's very different, really.
Are there consequences for violations?
Yeah. And it's... Sorry?
Do you happen to know what some of those consequences for violating the rights of minorities in your country?
It depends, because some minorities are better protected, some are protected in a worse way. For example, if it comes to hate speech, national, ethnic, religious minorities are very well protected, not sexual minorities, again. So, and now it's being discussed to, expand this scope of minorities. But there are some groups of people, even if their rights are violated, they do not have any consequences. Yeah. So not everybody is protected in the same way. So another thing that we organize every year is Letterwriting Marathon, when we meet for 24 hours and we write letters defending the prisoner of consciousness, but not only people from different paths of life, of career.
Sorry, I need to interrupt. I do want to follow up on Dr. Acker's question. Do you believe that if Poland was not a member of the EU, that it would be much more fundamentalist and much more intolerant in terms of
course.
homophobia? And
Of course. Of course. The European access does not mean only that we can travel, we have free market. First of all, we have to comply with some regulations, not with everything, because some areas are excluded or we are more independent, but still, yes, when I, for example, organize at school different events that were aimed at protecting minorities, sometimes teachers or parents complained that they don't want it at school. They don't want to talk about Roma people at school, for example. And I said, sorry, the European Union documents oblige me as a teacher to promote these things. So it was very, useful tool for me. So again, as different people appear in this marathon, as the people imprisoned for their views, for their identity, it's again the lesson for students, the lesson of tolerance and understanding. We do tens of different events in public space to show people's diversity, and it's too little time to describe all of them. It's one at the railway station when we showed that however we differ, on the back, on the front, we are all human. And we also, when something happens in the world, anywhere, I teach my students to defend, to support, whether these are the people in Belarus, that is the protest against the limiting freedom of speech, or Free Tibet campaign, or Fair Trade campaign, they do get involved. And suddenly, the students, I can see what happens in their heads. They discover the problems they did not realize. It's not because they are so, interested only in Facebook, etc. But even at school, they are not taught about this. They are not taught social justice things. That was the problem. I also did a lot of projects concentrated on Jewish minority and Jewish things, and I found out that the best way to combat anti-Semitism is showing people that these people were our neighbors. In almost every Polish city, we had the Jewish community before the war. So we cleaned the cemeteries, we did the happenings in the public places to show the Jewish culture, to reconstruct the Jewish life in our city. And it really changed their attitude. After these projects, the students and the teachers and the local community, people said, oh, we didn't know we had Jewish people, really? So it was a kind of discovery, but it also changes them in the way they think about Jewish people now. If you imagine that somebody was your neighbor, if you imagine that in the toy shop that is today, there used to be a toy shop of the Jewish person before war, you look at places and you look at people in a different way. We did a lot of projects on the Holocaust, which is taught in schools, but I don't think in the sufficient way still, and not always in the proper way, because very often in Poland it is delivering facts. We don't teach students to look at the Holocaust from the perspective of the victim, of the survivor, of the rescuer, of the bystander, first of all. And when they are taught in this perspective, they start thinking. And the Holocaust, when we connect Holocaust with other genocides, they see how update problem it can be. I mean, that it's not the past only. Very often we do different projects, happenings, exhibitions on gender issues. Violence against women is something that is very often tabooed and silenced about in Poland, as gender issues last month or in last year, let's say, as very often the violence against women is perceived as something private. We shouldn't interfere, we shouldn't talk about it. Family is something that is saint, and we shouldn't interfere in what's happening in it. And so there is a kind of social permission to stop violence. And what I also did at my school, and now I do at university, and is not very often, or actually it's extremely rare, it's talking about gender issues and talking about homophobia. And for me, it started years ago when I was a teacher, and I had one student. His name was Christopher. I didn't know what's happening with him. He tried to commit suicide. He had some problems with family, with friends, and he obviously was calling for help. And once we were on the trip, and I started talking with him, and he said that he was gay. And he opened the sea of intolerance in front of me that he experienced every day at school and the family. And he told me about it, and I accepted. And on the next day, I saw him, and I saw a different boy. He was as if the stone fell off his heart. But after 1 week, he said, I feel bad that you know as a teacher and my parents don't know. Please, come to my home, tell my parents. And I said, okay, I will. And I went, and I started, because they were very worried what's happening with him. He said, what's going with our Christopher? Is he taking drugs? Is he dealing with mafia? Or what's going on? I said, no, nothing, don't worry. He's just gay. And his mother said, no, it's impossible. I know my son. And his father said, why this did happen to me? So it was one of the most difficult conversations in my life. But it also opened my eyes. And I realized how these people feel in Poland, how they feel in my school, where I promote social justice and human rights. So I started to talk with my voluntary students group about the problem, and they started to notice the problem. And they got very involved in different actions. We did marches against homophobia, homophobic ambulatory, where we delivered leaflets about what is and what is not homosexuality. We put prejudices in the basket in a very symbolic way, tearing the paper with prejudices and putting in the basket. We involved the authorities of the city to come to our happenings and to put their hands on the board homophobia I'm against. And they came, which was, a kind of break in the authorities. I mean, I know that they not necessarily wanted to come, but if they hadn't come, then it would have meant that they support homophobia. So they did it, and a lot of people saw the president of the city who's against homophobia, and it does change people. And yes?
So is there any procedure for approaching people like you did? Like, is there any procedure or protocol for approaching people?
Approaching people, you mean?
For going to the person and saying, what is the problem with my son? He's gay. Was there anything you have to follow, or just no?
No, it depended entirely on me. You mean the official procedures or something? It was in high school, no. I mean, I was the tutor of this class, not only a teacher, but I was the person responsible for, things that are connected not only with their learning and teaching them, but with all this educational, bringing them up, I would say, wychowawca.
There's a different system in Poland where you will be assigned a class. And so your responsibilities as that, it's like an advisor. for that entire class, and so your responsibilities extend beyond their academic curriculum to supporting them in many other kinds of ways.
Exactly. So I was advisor of this class. As the advisor, you are supposed to visit families if you feel as the advisor of the class. If I wasn't advisor, that would be, yes, strange. If I was just a maths or English teacher. But as I was the advisor, it was something that was absolutely justified, and yeah. And 2 years ago, I started cooperation with the American Educational Center, which is located in Fort Scott, in Kansas State, Lowell Milken Center. And Norman Connard, the director of the center, discovered the Polish rescuer, Irina Sandler. And he really discovered it also for us, for Polish people, because now there are a lot of schools named after her, a lot of projects on her, but it started with him and his 4 students who did a project. And now he runs a center that supports schools in discovering other unsung heroes. And I, with my students, did 2 projects. On one is on the woman. Now she's over 80. She lives in our city, and she rescued a Jewish girl from the ghetto during World War II. Another one is a Roma teacher who supports Roma children at school, but also she does a lot of things to build bridges between Roma and non-Roma community. So we did, and we did a website on this lady and the film about the Roma woman, and now, and it still lives. I mean, it also, I think, changes what is especially important with this Roma person. It changes people's attitudes towards this minority, because a lot of people perceive them in a very negative way.
What are Romans?
Sorry?
What are the Roma people?
Gypsy. Yeah. So these are just some chosen things that I'm trying to promote and I'm doing, as I believe that teaching social justice is looking into our own prejudices and disarming them by different ways, but it's also looking back into the past. It's encountering, meeting, sometimes physically meeting the ones who are different to find out they are the same. Thank you very much.